Greetings, friend, and welcome to the Between the Covers podcast, where we are working every day to remove the self-limiting beliefs that are preventing us from becoming the heroes of our own stories. I am Marcus Spar, and today I wanted to talk about some things that I have learned over the last, 6 years or so of playing tabletop role-playing games, specifically Dungeons and Dragons. This is something that when I initially started this podcast, I thought these kind of episodes would be fun. And I can't believe it's taken me over a year and over 50 episodes to finally do the first one here. But let's talk about what are some things that I have learned in my time of playing Dungeons and Dragons. If you grew up in the conservative evangelical Christian circles that I did, it was pretty common to hear that Dungeons and Dragons was demonic, even satanic, or anything that would bring some kind of evil into your world, into your home, just because there is this spell casting and there's these evils that you're fighting in the game. And I really wish that I had started playing way sooner than I did. I started playing in, if I remember right, 2018. And it has turned out to be way different than I had ever heard from really anyone previously. One of the first things that I learned is that you can fail at a role within this game, and it can have dire consequences, but that doesn't mean that the story is over. This is actually a very good metaphor for life, in my opinion. And I can't tell you how many times I have spoken with others, and it's something that I've struggled with personally, that a failure just means that I'm not good at something, and therefore I just shouldn't even try and do that anymore. It's not worth it. However, that couldn't be further from the truth, because I know of many, many people who have taken a brave step to, say, start a family, a business, go back to school. And some of these endeavors have not proven to be as successful as anyone actually really hoped that it would have. And that is absolutely unfortunate. For many of these people, though, they're able to pick themselves up and try again. Try something similar, try something different. But the story doesn't come to an end. And I want to refer you to a much earlier podcast. In fact, I think it was one of the first 10 that I released on rolling successes and failures. In that, I share the story about my character Ravane and his wonderful inability to roll well whenever he was trying to connect with the deity that he served. And it was not game breaking. It wasn't the end of the story. It just reinforced this conflict that the character had. And it was incredibly amusing for myself and for others around the table that it's still a running gag of rolling as well as Ravane with his religion checks. There are times when we're playing these games that something bad does happen and a story comes to a close. There is this thing within the D&D community that is known as a TPK, or a total party kill. And sometimes a party makes a bad decision and they go up against something that they are unable to handle, or the enemies are just rolling very well and the heroes are just rolling very poorly. That happens sometimes. And a character dies. or an entire party dies. And it is very unfortunate and sad when that happens. With the group that I play with, if something like that were to happen, the story would still continue. We would just create new characters. We would start at whatever level we were when our characters met their untimely end, and we would just start with a brand new party and continue the story. One of the things that I really enjoy about D&D is how it is high stakes and low stakes at the same time. It can be high stakes for the characters in the stories, and yet for those of us who are playing the games, it's relatively low stakes. You can make decisions, you can try things out, and if it fails, if it succeeds, you get to experience the consequences of those actions and try and figure out a way to move forward on those failures, or give a really good fist bump or something like that. Not a fist bump, an arm pump when you do something spectacular, when something that you were planning and trying for actually comes to fruition. One of the other things that I have learned in my time playing Dungeons and Dragons is that it is an incredible tool to help us explore ourselves. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken with when we talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I share with them about my character Ravain, and he was the third character I created. He's the only one who actually finished the campaign that we were working through. And I made him very personal to me. This is something that seems to be very common, I think. That when we create these characters that we're playing in these adventures, we put some of ourselves into these characters. I created a character who was a paladin struggling with a faith crisis. Now, I'm not a paladin by any means, but I really have wrestled with difficult questions about my own faith. It is something that I have been afraid to admit to a lot of people. Being Christian and asking some of the questions that I have asked is something that oftentimes gets people judged, criticized, ostracized. And this actually turned out to be a way for me to explore what's it like to have this character who is struggling with his own faith. He's supposed to get his powers from this benevolent God, and yet he's also seeing a lot of the evils winning. He sees a lot of bad things happening to good people. He loses a lot of really good friends over the years, and he just really struggles with this concept of, I'm serving a good God. Why is all of this bad stuff happening still? And I will be honest, when I was playing Ravain, this was very, very challenging for me to determine some of the actions that this character would take, because I really had to think about what I would do in that situation. Would I do something violent in order to take down some great evil? Would I instead walk away and say, I'm not prepared to do this? Would he rely on his friends? Would he keep things to himself? And I use this as an avenue to explore myself. And that's something that was very incredible. And I was able to do it within this very safe environment with some very dear friends. Something that I feel is very common with individuals who play tabletop role-playing games is we are able to do incredible things when we collaborate with others that we trust. Have you ever heard of the concept never split the party? Oh, I cannot tell you how many times something bad happens when a party decides to split up in order to explore different areas of a dungeon or a castle or a town even. And someone gets into a mess, some kind of dire situation, there's a conflict or something takes place, and they weren't able to overcome it because they didn't have the full support of those who they trusted. They didn't have everyone behind them, supporting them, trying to help them overcome whatever this challenge is. One of the first things that we learned very early on is you never split the party. And this is something that can be a hard learned lesson. I had the opportunity back in 2023. This was May of 2023, I believe. I had this opportunity to run a campaign for one of my nephews and 4 of his friends. No, 5 of his friends. There were 6 kids and myself. My nephew had been very interested in D&D, wanted to try it out, and he had some friends that were interested in trying it. So I went up and I spent a weekend in order to take them through this beginning module that he was gifted for Christmas. And one of the things that they learned, and this was very unfortunate and sad that it happened this way, they got into a fight with some thugs. And in this fight, they split the party. One of the things that is often a solid method, or not method, a solid strategy for taking down enemies is you focus on taking down one enemy. Once that one's down, then you move on to the other. And these people, they were, I think it was an even, if I remember right, it was pretty even. Otherwise, it was like 5 against 6. But they decided to split up, and they all started facing off against different enemies. And this did not turn out very well. What ended up transpiring through this battle, they did end up winning, but they lost one of their own. There was this one individual who was playing a monk character, and the monk was on the front line and ended up getting into a fight with 2 people at once. And this character died. This was right before we were going to call it quits for the weekend. And this friend had to go home. It was unfortunate. It was sad that it happened that way. And I can guarantee you, all 6 of those kids that were at the table will remember what happened when they divided their efforts and they split the party the way that they did. We are so much stronger when we have a solid community around us, supporting us, and helping us overcome whatever challenges we face, while we continue to do the same for them and help them. We help support them and help them through challenges that they face. This is probably one of the most divisive topics about playing these kind of role-playing games, and I'll explain why here. One of the other things that I have learned is that this game, this style of game, it helps us to explore other outcomes in our lives. Now, what's divisive about this, and this is something that my friends and I joke about quite often when we're playing, is there is a saying that D&D is not therapy. However, I can't tell you how many times D&D is used as a form of therapy. If we put some semblance of ourselves in these characters that we create and they're going on these grand adventures, there is a good chance that we will be forced to wrestle with something that has happened to us in the past. When this happens, we end up experiencing the potential for a different outcome to take place, and it can be incredibly therapeutic. It makes me think of the character Ravain. What happened with him is he kept trying to commune with his deity, and he just wasn't getting the answers. Every single time I had to roll that religion roll, I rolled terribly. In fact, I believe I rolled more ones than I rolled anything other than one. And he just never was able to get the answers that he sought. This is something that hits pretty close to home to me. In my experience growing up as a Christian, I have had times where I was told to pray about something, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed, and it felt like my prayers just hit a ceiling. It felt like I was really just speaking to the air, and there was nothing to show for these efforts. And when I was playing this character Ravain, we were getting close to the final confrontation with the big bad. And I decided to have him try and connect with his god one more time. And this time, my friend Katie, who was running the campaign, she didn't have me roll for it. She instead provided a vision that showed Ravain surrounded by darkness, but with him in the center of all of this darkness was all of the companions and the friends that he had been on this incredible journey with for since the beginning. And they were all shining brightly in the darkness and fighting against it. And she essentially just gave this message similar to what the previous point was, that with the support of these very good people, you can overcome this darkness. And that was something that really spoke volumes to me. In fact, I'm pretty certain I even just thanked my friend Katie for that, because that spoke to something that I was deeply wrestling with at the time. Dungeons and Dragons is not meant to be therapy. I'm not saying that instead of talking with a professional licensed counselor or therapist, that you instead play Dungeons and Dragons or some other tabletop role-playing game. However, there is something about this game and the way that we are working together that it actually does help us to explore some of these different outcomes to very real issues in our lives. Here in the United States, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, each side is saying that the other side is being tyrannical. If you want to know what it's like to live in a world that's run by a tyrant, there are some games of tabletop role-playing games that you can play where you're trying to overcome a tyrant and you can see what has been created in this world. That is a potential outcome that you can experience. The last thing that I want to share that I've learned through D&D for this episode, and there's likely going to be more because I wrote down 10 things and this is only the 5th one. The last thing is that sometimes the journey is more valuable than the treasures that you find in the end. There have been moments where we have really overcome some incredible odds and have found ourselves fighting for our lives. And I'm talking specifically about Dungeons and Dragons here. And when we get to the end goal, sometimes it's like the main story, sometimes it's some kind of side quest, but we explore, and one of the things that is very common is we love to look around for the treasures. We want to find those magic items. We want to have some way to receive a valuable reward and strengthen our characters. And sometimes those rewards aren't exactly what you would have liked. And yet, what was more valuable was the camaraderie and the time that you got to spend with all of these other people. It's more about overcoming sometimes insurmountable odds and finding yourself victorious, and that is enough of a reward. Sometimes the best part about these campaigns are the inside jokes that you develop along the way. In the campaign that I'm running with my friends, one of the things, my friend Brandon is playing a tween girl right now. And everyone else is much older than his character. And we just have this running joke that whenever one of the other characters gets like ale or wine or something like that, well, this 12-year-old is always like, hey, can I have some of that? And it's just this running gag of, nope, you're not old enough. Nope, you need to have this instead. And it turns into this back and forth where we just play out these really bizarre scenarios that don't even take place in the game itself. It's just all between our friends. It's just between the players, and it just gets us laughing. Sometimes what is more important is discovering the really cool things that you can do when you are working with some of these other people. In fact, a little bit of honesty behind my GM screen here is something that comes up a lot. Is my friend Ben wanted to have his character do something really spectacular. And while this was taking place, well, I'll just share what was going on. He wanted to essentially walk on water, so to speak. He wanted to jump from this piece of land, jump off of a piece of ice that was made by the spellcaster in the group, my friend John, and jump off of this piece of ice onto another little bit of land, because they were in some kind of miry, swampy place beneath a castle. And one of the things that I had forgotten is the concept of the rule of cool. And that is, if they're doing something cool and it's not going to detract from the story, and in fact it actually helps to further the story along, then just let it happen. I had forgotten about this rule as my friend Ben is trying to do this. And instead of having this miraculous jump from land off of this piece of ice that was created by a spellcaster laying down some kind of frost bolt or something to create the step for the barbarian to jump off and get onto the other piece of land. I decided to let physics work itself out in this instance, that it was a little piece of ice in a, well, more like probably like a 1.5 foot like plate of ice in the middle of a ton of water, and it didn't work out the way that my friend Ben wanted it to work out. He still got across, but his barbarian just got awfully wet in the process because he fell into the water instead of jumping across it like he wanted. That would have been an incredible story of how they were able to do some really fun and dramatic action in order to progress the plot forward. And now it's just kind of lost to, well, that was a fun little attempt, but it didn't really work out. And I wish that I'd done it differently. I wish that I just let them have their fun, do the cool thing, and just let it happen. I can tell you that at the end of that part of their adventure, they didn't really get all that much cool stuff. But they could have come out with a really cool story of what had happened. And that part of the journey could have been significantly more valuable than any of the treasures that they found. I hope that you have enjoyed this glimpse into this really fun hobby of mine and some of the things that I have learned from it. I do plan on doing more of these, and not just about D&D. I want to incorporate other aspects of things that I enjoy or things that I have learned in life. If you enjoyed this episode, I would greatly appreciate it if you liked this video and subscribed so you don't miss out on any future uploads. If you're interested in working with me, there are links in the description where you can take a look at my website, see what I'm doing. You can schedule a free 50-minute one-on-one call with me just to see if we'll be a good fit and we can get the conversation started. You can also find a link to submit any questions or potential hero study ideas that can be a part of a future episode. Look forward to talking with you again next week, and until then, live strong for today.